Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar, Welcome Wagon Works, a tool for rural revitalization. My name is Patty Cantrell, and I am with New Growth. That's a community development corporation in West Central Missouri. And we are the convener of the Start Here Business Acceleration Network. The Start Here series that you're participating in every other month, we're bringing interesting topics for people, for lovers and leaders of small towns, to learn from people who are out there doing it, trying to build entrepreneurship and revitalize their communities. And we have a great show for you here today with Mallory Ray, available to us from the University of Missouri Extension. I'll introduce her in a minute, but real quickly, I want to just tell you a little bit more about Start Here. Again, we are a group of organizations with the vision of entrepreneurship being a leading economic development strategy in our rural communities. We think that that needs more emphasis, and how we put that forward is all of us working together to really build the rural entrepreneurial ecosystem. One of the things that we've been doing is working together on a series of technical assistance, credit building, and micro enterprise financing resources in our area. And it's really been a great teamwork with the different organizations, local economic developers, and our Small Business Development Center, New Growth Women's Business Center, and others, referring and sharing and making sure that we leave no entrepreneur behind in our rural areas. Technical assistance you all are probably familiar with. That's training and business planning and one-on-one assistance. Several partners in our network do that. Credit building is where we try to really get people, including small businesses, into the financial mainstream by addressing how we can build and improve credit scores so we can get to traditional financing. And that's the same with micro enterprise financing. New Growth has loans $50,000 and less, all for people who are in the pipeline on their way to traditional financing. And we find in our rural areas, these are really important resources to get our local businesses going and growing. And so tune into the Start Here Network. We're on Facebook at New Growth Mo, and the website is newgrowthmo.org. Again, we're the home of this partnership, really, again, trying to build entrepreneurship in our rural areas. And we are so pleased to have Mallory Ray with us today. She's the Associate Extension Professor at University of Missouri Extension with Agricultural Business and Policy Education. She has been working across the country on really addressing the needs of small businesses and communities, especially around how do we build the connections, build wealth through connecting businesses and all along what's called the value chain, really trying to address how we build up those industries in our area. And you'll probably have a lot of questions for Mallory Ray. We do have the Q&A section down below. Be sure and dig into that. I'm going to hand it off to Mallory to talk a little bit today about why a Welcome Wagon strategy is so key for our rural communities. She's dug into the data and learned that there is indeed rural in-migration happening, but you really need to understand who those people are and how to keep them. So I'll stop sharing and hand it over to Mallory.
Thanks so much, Patty. Are you seeing my slides?
I am.
Perfect. So here's a picture of me who's about 15 years old. And the reason I'm showing this picture is that this is actually taken of a small town in Illinois, or what's left of it. Neelyville, Illinois, started on the railroad line, and it was a critical supplier to the railroad. Today, it is our family farm. And there's a little house back here that's just barely visible. That house was the last inhabitants of Neelyville, and they left in the 1950s, but the house still stands. So the area that I'm from in rural Illinois has seen a lot of population decline. As Patty explained, I work now at the University of Missouri, and I've been here almost 4 years. And before that, I spent almost 9 years at Oregon State University, always with an emphasis on rural development. And at various times I've had a real heavy emphasis on developing value-added agricultural businesses. But today I want to talk about some of my other work on population retention. So first, I just want to spend a few minutes kind of going over some things so we all sort of have the baseline foundational understanding of how population change has occurred in rural America. So over here on this side of the screen, you have a more historical perspective. This is looking at population change year over year from 1976 to 2017. And the red is non-metro or rural America. And this is based on county definitions. So you can see that the rural areas have really seen popularity and then decline. And this kind of coincides with our recessions. So when times are good, when economic times are good, people feel like they have more flexibility, they have more options, and there's more jobs. Generally during those times, rural areas will see population growth. When recessions hit and jobs are lost, suddenly cities become far more attractive, and we tend to see people move more from rural to urban environments, particularly at those times. So this graph looks at what's happened a bit since 2017. Both of these come from ERS. Unfortunately, they changed the colors and the scale a little bit. And I haven't taken the time I need to just create my own, but I haven't yet. So here we're switching from red to blue, and we're really seeing something pretty dramatic. For the first time in history, from 2010 to 2020, rural America lost people on whole. And this decline was really significant. And then during COVID, we saw a sharp reversal. And this motivated some work right here in Missouri that I want to talk to you about today, because as this was happening, rural leaders are often looking for, what's the hook? A lot of rural places, but not all, suffer population decline, and they know that they need to do something. And rural people are very entrepreneurial and innovative. That's why I love working with rural communities, because there's always good ideas out there. The challenge is how to catalyze those ideas within resource constraints. So we were approached by some rural community leaders to try to understand, is this pandemic, is the rise in telecommunications, telework, an opportunity for us to attract people, even if we may not have the jobs locally for them? And why were they focusing on migration? It's because that is what's driving population change in rural America. So here we're only looking at non-metro counties or rural America. And we're going to focus, this blue line is how the total population has changed. And the pink line is natural change. This is births minus deaths. So we can see the natural change in rural areas has been slowly declining. But most recently, it's declined a lot. What this is signifying is that rural America had, in general, we have older populations in rural America. We have less healthy people. We have lower access to healthcare resources. The pandemic hit rural America really hard, and we saw a tremendous increase in death rates in the last couple of years. So all while we see fewer and fewer births as a nation. So when we see the population go back up, you can see that's in face of the increase in deaths. What was driving that population change was migration, net migration. So we always have people moving. America is a very mobile society compared to a lot of other countries. It's something about our DNA. We just, as a country, we have been mobile, much more mobile than many other countries for a long time. So when we look at each year, there's always people moving in and there's always people moving out. But on the whole, more people were moving into rural America in the last couple of years. So now we're going to look at just rural Missouri to try to put these numbers into some context. So this is every non-metro county, every rural county in Missouri. And you can see the blue is births minus deaths. So very, very small numbers. And in fact, it was negative from 2016 to 2017, and again from 2018 to 2019. So green is international migration, net, and red is domestic migration. So rural Missouri has seen population decline the last several years. This data is not completely up to date. And that's really been driven by, again, migration. There's just far more people who are moving compared to the difference between births and deaths. So it becomes a really important question. Why are people moving, and how do we influence their migration decision at a local level? What can we do? And what can we do within our resources? So as I started to preview a couple slides ago, we were reached out to by Northwest Missouri. They really wanted to understand, how can we reduce population loss? And we were having this conversation very early in the pandemic. And what we shared with them is that based on existing research findings from other places in the United States, what we know is that people are most likely to move into rural areas like Northwest Missouri when they have a previous tie. We call these people returners. They grew up in the region or spent some time in the region. They left typically for education or work opportunities. And among everyone, they're more likely to come back than somebody who has never had a connection to that place. It's even better when somebody leaves, marries, starts a family elsewhere, and then they're bringing back not just themselves, but a whole family unit. And these people can have very positive influences in their communities. They have new skills, new experiences, and new perspectives. We also know that they can face tremendous challenges because new ideas and perspectives and attitudes are not always welcomed, or can be difficult to sort of find their niche in a community and find a way to feel like they have a voice and their voice is valued. So what we found, we set out, we showed them this information and we said, we feel like your best chance to recruit people is really going to be to find those people who've had a previous attachment to your community, your region, and help them understand what's going on. But they wanted to fact check this. So we did a big survey in these 17 rural counties, and we included Buchanan County with St. Joe, Missouri, because this was the region. This work was supported by the Maximize Northwest Missouri effort and funded by the Community Foundation of Northwest Missouri. So here's that region within the broader scale of the surrounding region and the whole country. And just for context, all of the gray you see are counties that are considered urban America. So the shaded counties, the light shading are counties that lost population from 2000 to 2017, and the dark counties are counties that gained population during that same time period. So in this broader region around Missouri, we see a lot of counties, rural counties, that have lost population, but not entirely. You know, there are some outliers. And what we also know about migration is that it follows a life cycle pattern. When you look at over a person's life cycle, so here is the age of a typical person broken down in 5-year increments. People are more or less mobile at various points of their life. And when we look at rural communities, we see that they are more likely to attract people in sort of this early returner. stage. So these are people between the ages of 30 and 40, mid 40s. They're coming back, and they bring with them young children. So people who've left the community, they may have gone somewhere to get some educational skill development that took them outside the region. They may have had a first job or two outside the region, and they're coming home. And most of the time they come home for social support and to be around family and sometimes friends that still live in the region. But these are very important people because they're bringing youth back to the community as well. They're young themselves and they're starting families. Not all of them bring children back, but some of them do. The other time where we see more significant likelihood to move to rural areas are early retirees. So these are people in their 60s who have likely built a career outside the region. And again, they're pulled home. And they're most often pulled home for family and friends, but also a different quality of life, different values in where they are, maybe a slower pace, just lots of motivations for why people make this decision. But those are the two time periods that rural areas are particularly good at attracting people. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this conversation. So we ran a survey during 2020 from July to October, and we had 2,500 responses within that 18 county region. And we offered people a broad range, like, I don't know, almost 15 different choices. Why did you stay in the county that you currently live in? Why did you come in? Why did you leave? And why have you returned? So we worked very hard to reach people from many different migration statuses. And really, I can't take any credit for this because it was the Northwest Missouri group, the Maximize Northwest Missouri group, who were very active in trying to find people who have left the community through Facebook groups. So here were the most commonly cited responses by migration status. So to be near family and friends was the largest reason for stayers. Why have you stayed here? It's my family and friends. And returners, again, family and friends. Second most common was this, I want my kids to grow up like I did. It's that sense of place. It's that identity. It's that way of life. They went off somewhere else and it was different, and they wanted to come back to what they're familiar with. People who in-migrate, we saw that they mostly come to support their spouse, which makes a lot of sense, and it supports this idea that this is why people are coming. They're not randomly finding this place. They're coming because they have a connection. And a lot of people leave for wage and salary job opportunities that are more attractive outside rural places. So this was a large survey. You can learn more about the survey. It's all online on our website, which I'll share here in a minute. But I also wanted to spend just a couple of more slides on some key takeaways that I think inform this broader conversation, because this webinar was really meant for anybody in Missouri, whether or not you're in Northwest Missouri or not. We're going to talk about assets later. We asked this question on the survey. And again, we wanted to understand how people view community assets based on their migration status. So again, among everybody, 44% of all respondents said the best thing about living or working in this region are my relationships with friends and family. The second most common was this community pride, a strong community identity. We had a lot of other possible assets that people could choose from. Here, I'm only showing the top 6, and you can kind of see a little bit of the breakdown by group, but there was more consistency across groups than we were expecting. Cost of living was the third most important choice. We all know that is a major draw to rural communities, for better or worse. Safety was the next most commonly cited amenity, size of town, and a sense of belonging. So in the context of population retention and attraction, we can't manufacture family relationships, right? They exist or they don't. But when it comes to friendship building, when it comes to community pride and strong community identity, there are real ways that local leaders and engaged citizens in small places can work together to be proactive and think about, how do we help new people really get established here? How do we help them identify with our own community pride, our own sense of place? How do we help them build friendships? Or at least, how do we be real transparent with ourselves and maybe more cognizant of ways that we are putting up barriers and excluding people who are new or who have different ideas? So this is the last slide I'll present from that survey. But we also asked people, okay, we asked some questions about their civic engagement and how connected they felt to their community. And then we asked them, what would you like to support in your community? And the most common response was, we want to support new businesses. And that goes back to this idea. It was less frequently cited as an asset, but there were questions about, having a place to gather, having a coffee shop, having access to professional services like a lawyer, an accountant locally. These were assets that were underweighted when it came to selecting from a list that included relationships with family and friends. But when we presented them with this list of ways to invest in the community, supporting local businesses was the most commonly selected choice. So I think that's really important. People understand that to truly, true community inclusion and engagement, it's a full thing. And many times rural communities become bedroom communities. They may just be places where people live, but not work. How do we help people have more opportunities to spend their money locally, to work locally, to get this fuller sense of a community locally? And a big part of that is our local business community. The next most common thing was supporting youth organizations. Again, think about sort of who gets attracted back to these places. How do we be intentional about getting our youth involved, supporting youth activities, supporting parents with youth, which it's a very difficult time to be a parent of young children. I can say that from firsthand experience. I lived in Oregon for 4 years with children, young children without family. And I decided that was enough. I had given up on that because it's very hard. It's a lot of stress, and a community that can recognize that and acknowledge the fact that every youth in that community is a potential lifelong resident if we really give them the skills, if we help them to feel included here, if we are able to create job opportunities for that person or set that person up to become an entrepreneur, right? So that was another big priority. And then I thought the third one was really interesting. This idea that we need to include a wider range of people and perspectives in local decision making. People saw that as an important priority. So we're going to talk more about this, but I want to take a pause here and see if there are any questions already. So looks like there is not anything in the chat at the moment.
I'm not seeing any either, but that's a good reminder. Please put in any questions or comments you have down there, and we'll definitely integrate them.
Because I hope up to this point, you've sort of understand that population decline is persistent in a lot of parts in rural America. And we're not going to solve that through increasing the birth rate. That, natural change is kind of doing what it's doing, but our policy lever is migration. So how do we be inclusive? How do we create space for people to want to move to our community? How do we capture the people who do come back and really help them get more connected? So we're going to talk about that. And I think a great low-cost solution is to really think about, should we form some new social networking entities? What does that look like? Who are we trying to target? What do we know about the population in our community? And it may take a little bit of conversations to sort of understand this. But for example, a welcoming committee can just focus on creating relationships with anyone who moves into the community, period. A young professionals group is designed to really help younger working people. And whether you use the word young or not is up to you, right? But if you have, so I did some work with communities in Iowa. They had a lot of businesses that were trying to recruit people in their 30s. And they realized, wait, we've got 5 employees, you have 7, this business over there has 10. But we've heard things from all of our employees, like they're struggling to find things to do. They don't know what to do on the weekends, so they start leaving more on the weekends. They want to hang out with people, and they don't know how to find people in their town. So 3 business entities came together and said, okay, we're starting this young professionals group. They created space during the work week where they set up like a networking time, and they rotated the location at the 3 offices. And it was part of work. It wasn't mandatory to attend, but your employer was signaling, I think your social relationships are important. I think it's important from a professional standpoint. I think you could learn something by being connected to other young professionals who are younger in their careers, perhaps more freshly trained and educated. And I want you to spend some time working with these people, getting to know them. So they set up like a happy hour from 3:30 to 5. And it was really successful. And employees started reporting back to their managers, this is a great group. I'm learning new things, like I've made new friends. It really added to their quality of life. And in the grand scheme of things, it had relatively low cost for each of those employers. So that's an example of how to start something very intentionally that then can kind of take on a life of its own. And that came from the private sector itself. But other ways of doing this are to acknowledge this demographic is important to us. And we're going to start setting some intentional events where we're just signaling like, we want to encourage networking. We want to encourage this across the whole town or across multiple small towns. This can happen at the regional level as well. And it takes somebody investing their time in making it happen. Other communities have approached this from the perspective of, okay, we need to just get a better understanding of the voices of new people, different people. So different mayors have set up committees to where they meet for coffee with and they work with others in the community to identify a target group. So whether that is, recently relocated retirees, whether that is the new professionals, because that is kind of a target. Those people are hard to keep in rural places. Or sometimes they really focus on youth involvement, whether they're new youth or, grew up in the community. But there's this acknowledgement that by leadership that we want to be more intentional in learning about these population segments so that we can respond to their needs. And it can be formal or informal. So that's one way of kind of starting this is creating something brand new. Another way is,
Mallory,
go ahead.
before you go into the next one, we did have a question, and that's a great intentionally facilitating network and learning from your population. That's really great examples there. And the question was regarding the data you shared. I see that new business support was high, but supporting individuals trying new things was not. What is there a conflict, contradictory in terms of what drives small business and new people needing to try new things?
Yeah, that's a really great observation, Chris, because this was, respondents could choose up to 2 of these areas. And I think, okay, I grew up in a rural area. I live in Columbia, Missouri now. So I say this with a lot of love, but sometimes people are judged harshly when they have a new idea, right? Sometimes if that, it sort of depends what that new idea is. If that new idea is well aligned with everybody else's ideas of what the town should be doing, then I think that person can get a lot of support. But I have observed in my work and in my personal experience living in rural areas, you're more likely to get buy-in based on who you are in a rural community and who knows you and who knows your family and what your family history is, and what people think of your family. And that is that's just the reality of small places where we know a lot about people. In an urban environment, you often don't know your neighbors, or you certainly don't know your neighbor's grandparents. But the dense social network internal to rural communities can be both a strength and a limitation. It's a strength when that group is able to really mobilize and pull together. And it's a huge limitation when that group, whether they are aware of it or not, have just put up a tremendous amount of barriers to outsiders. When I was doing work in Oregon, there was somebody who was new to a region, a small town. They moved there because it was quiet and beautiful. But this town was sort of making a name for themselves during the summer by having big summer events. And they were trying to become a destination for like some big signature events with music and stage, and there was no noise ordinance. And when these events came to town, the whole town had just kind of agreed that it was okay if there was trash and litter everywhere, if the speakers were playing after midnight. Like, they didn't care. They were bought into the idea that we're going to become an event town. And a newcomer said, "Hey, do you think we could maybe revisit this? Can we set up some different expectations for when visitors come to our town?" And that person had their tires slashed the night after they talked about that at a city council meeting. And they received some really hateful letters that were put inside their door. And that's the kind of, the fact that not only does everybody know that I'm the one that has to say something different, but they know exactly where I live. They can come find me. The tires were slashed in the middle of the night when the car was in the driveway. So that's a bit of a challenge, but also an opportunity for rural areas. So I think that if I have to read into what I see about this, I think that is a little bit of the hesitation. New businesses, it's a bit clear. Okay, like But when we talk about new businesses, sometimes we see really strong lines drawn, right? So again, I'm just gonna draw on Oregon examples or Iowa examples because it's easier. I don't have to worry about offending anybody here. But Oregon went through recreational marijuana a lot earlier than Missouri is doing. So I got to see a lot of stuff. And, you know, when you talk about what businesses are allowed or disallowed, people have sometimes very, very strong opinions. But on the whole, in this survey, people were saying, yeah, we support new businesses. That felt, I think, safer than we want to champion efforts of people trying new things. That was a super long response, but
this is Patty, and if you open to another question, it kind of relates to the networking that you suggested. That is a really great strategy. And how did they, or can you include those, break open some of those small groups in that way? Do you have any examples along those lines of the networking also opening interaction with, existing groups or in the small town?
yeah, so it seems like some communities, I have observed some communities are just, they're farther along on this curve. They have seen the impacts of declining population and it has motivated them to change. So it's very situation specific, but it's why I sort of started with this idea of sometimes rather than trying to change the establishment, it's a little bit easier for a group of locals to come together and say, okay, we're going to start something new. Because when something is new, it can take its own life and you're not offending anybody as much, perhaps. But another way to approach this is think about your existing strong social networks and what are those networks? How receptive are the formal and informal leaders of those networks to change, to this idea of becoming more intentional about including new people and new ideas? Because, for example, in Iowa, there was a town that was very committed to this, and they had a school district that the high school band was huge and well funded, and the community provided, uniforms and instruments to anybody who couldn't afford them. And they made the effort whenever they got a new enrollment in school, they sat down sometimes multiple times with the parents if necessary. And this was junior high and up, so it doesn't apply to young kids. But we want your student to join our band. We're lowering the barriers. It's not going to cost you a lot if you can't afford it or you're worried about maybe your child doesn't like music. We really want your child to join our band. And the reason for that is that the band started practicing 2 weeks before school started. And the school district knew that if they could get a student on site in a outside of the classroom environment, in an environment where it's a team effort, you're all trying to make harmonious music together, that child did so much better when the actual school year started. So it became a really big focus, and that was driven completely by the school district. They knew this is a really critical investment we can make to help new students succeed in our school. Another community had a very large festival, the kind of festival that they plan year-round for. And they decided that the festival had a heritage theme to it that was very important to the sense of pride from the original settlers who founded that town. But they didn't want to exclude new people. In fact, they wanted everybody to sort of to buy in, to feel included to this idea that when you live here, like we do this festival, it's a community-wide effort. So they developed a 3-year leadership structure. So each of the key positions on this community festival committee had 3 people in the role. They had the person who was leading it, the person who led it last year, and the person who would lead it the following year. And they worked very hard to plug in new people to that committee, in not like the main, like the person running everything, but in the subcommittees, so that they were immediately paired with 2 other established community members, and they had a task to complete. So for example, there was the costume committee. And so, our job is to make sure that we are making new costumes available for people who need them, who want to participate in the festival. There was the food committee, there was the marketing and promotion committee. And each of these cases, they had it worked out. They knew what needed to get done, and they wanted to bring new people into the fold. And so it gave them a very concrete way to engage with new people. And it worked. It was working really well. And I remember I said, this seems like a lot of work to put on a new person. And they said, yeah, sometimes it doesn't always work out, but more often than not, it does. And we have found that we build such strong ties with the people who join our committees, and it helps others in the community view them not as an outsider, but an insider, because we're giving them a leadership role in something that's really important to the community. So that's another example. It's this idea of, what are your strong organizations in your community, and those vary widely, whether that's, the school, the government, the churches, nonprofits, other civic organizations, the Chamber of Commerce. How do we become really intentional about creating small opportunities for leadership for new people? I talked earlier about the importance of your assets. When you're thinking about how to implement a population retention and attraction strategy, it's really important to think about your assets. One of the first things is, who else has a vested interest in population attraction and retention? And then the next question is, what are these entities already doing to attract people? So I'll go back to how hard it is to attract young professionals. If you're a community that has a hospital, ask them, what are they doing? How do they recruit doctors and nurses? Are there ways to piggyback or support or supplement what they're doing and grow beyond that effort? And when you think about, just like the festival I mentioned, what do you want to plug people into? How do you really start getting people invested in your place? Is it certain natural amenities? Is it signature events? Is it raising awareness of new businesses? And again, as you develop these schemes, there was another community who took the community-wide professional networking example, but they were very intentional. Instead of rotating it among 3 participating employers, they rotated it among local businesses that were viewed as being more, hip, more attractive to younger people. So the coffee shop, they had a local brew pub. They had some local stores where they sat within the merchandise, but they still were, in each of their meetings, they were having that local entrepreneur offer a welcome and an introduction and tell their story of why they chose to start a business in that community. And that local example can be really, really powerful, much more than people recognize. it can also come with some costs to our entrepreneurs. Sometimes I think we put too much weight on our small businesses, especially our brand new businesses, because we get all excited and we want them to make donations and we want them to support this and support that. So I would actually encourage you to think about, how do we do this in a way where it's mutually beneficial for those new businesses? Are we renting space from them? Are we chipping in and covering the first $100 or $200 of the food and beverage bill for the event? Those kinds of direct recognitions that running a small business is hard. We appreciate you. We value you. We want to bring you business, which is in your self-interest, but we also recognize, like, we're actually going to pay you a little bit to really help us out on this because we value you and you're seen by us, community leaders. So when you're thinking about attracting newcomers, again, don't feel overwhelmed. There are ways to build upon existing information that don't have to cost a lot. A really critical question is, who's going to lead this effort? And we all know that rural people wear a ton of hats, and everybody is so crazy busy these days, it seems like. But having a single point of contact who's sort of the go-to person can be really important. Just make sure those people have a support system that they can delegate to, hand things off, and people who will hold them accountable as well. Because if you really feel like, I have no idea where to start, or I don't know what my assets are, I have no idea if anybody else cares about this or is already doing things, it can be very instructive to just have some initial conversations. I'm calling them interviews. That was too formal. It doesn't have to be that specific, but it should be a conversation where someone is taking notes to record later and share back with a group that's invested in this idea. And later, if you're a larger community or there's suddenly more interest in this idea, then you can do some focus groups, bringing group conversations where you're going over information or ideas, brainstorming, and then prioritizing on what to do and assigning tasks. And if you're looking for kind of a first place, again, think about the people who are already engaging with newcomers. So your real estate agents, how well do you know them? How well do they talk to each other? In this Iowa community, they were very intentional. They provided childcare. It became one of the things that they viewed as critical to retaining younger employees. And so they pooled resources, and the hospital led it, and they set up a childcare center. And they made sure that all the real estate agents were aware of this, and so that they could talk about it to families who were shopping for houses. And in return, the real estate agents were feeding information on, hey, this is a new family coming. Here's their closing date. This is where they're from. It's a single person, it's a married couple, they have this many kids, here's the ages. And it allowed the other parts of the community to really think about, okay, what's our response? How do we step in and meet the needs of this new family? School enrollment is another time, whether or not your school is willing to be proactive, as in the band example. Are they willing to provide information on new families, the parents of new families, so that there could be a more deliberate outreach to them? And then the same with major employers. Sometimes that's a really good point where if somebody is making a lot of new hires, how many of those people are new to the community? Is this a way to quickly identify new people? Maybe they don't live in your town, so they haven't interacted with a real estate agent, or they're renting and they haven't interacted with a real estate agent. They don't have school-aged children. How else can you try to capture people? This is again that reminder about age, because you want to think about or be prepared to offer a range of ways for individuals to feel connected. So Here's an easy question. What are your don't miss weekends? Signature events, great times to go to a key outdoor amenity. How do you help people not miss an opportunity to see your town at its best? You want to make that information available to people as soon as you can and give them that opportunity to be there and be a part of it. You also want to help them be aware of new businesses and existing businesses. You want to help them shop locally, right? So think about that as a way to help people feel connected. Don't miss weekends and help them shop locally. You may also want to try to focus on this idea of finding affinity groups, people with similar interests. Again, this may be more of the higher touch communities they have somebody who's willing to actually have a conversation. So, or get to know a person through some repeated interactions. So you're really able to plug somebody in as you learn more about their life and their needs, and recognizing that people with young children and retirees have very different needs. They have different interests, they have different, they're looking for different things in their life. And then some people are really going to get engaged by this idea of volunteering and the ability to give back. And so we talk a lot about rural America about there's not enough volunteers or people don't step up. And I don't disagree. But I will say that I have, lived in 3 different states, and I have tried to volunteer in the past and have been told, oh, we don't need you. We're not sure you're going to do it the way we want you to. No, we're fine. And I was very appalled by this, right? Like, again, sometimes we all just need to think to ourselves, the person who wants to volunteer, they may not do the best job in the world, but that is an opportunity to build a relationship, to have somebody make a much more bigger investment in your place and really feel attached to your place. How do we be deliberate about letting people know there are opportunities to get connected? And then this is another idea for the future. Does your community retain a list of high school graduates? Getting back to that idea of, are you able to reach returners? Northwest Missouri was very frustrated that they didn't have it, or it was kind of at a high school by high school level, and no one had ever tried to pull that together, even at a county level. And it varied widely. It depended on staff capacity, and no one was trying to actually update contacts. And we know young people are very mobile, and their information will change, So I have seen other communities do an effective job at putting out a message to past high school graduates. At homecoming, usually there's some effort to do this, but this was in addition to that effort. And it was a targeted message to say, hey, we miss you. Here are the new businesses that have opened in the last 6 months. Here are the signature events that are coming up in the next 6 months. We can't wait to have you back. That kind of message is really powerful. And I'm not going to say that it may be low cost in terms of, especially if you have email addresses, but it is high cost in terms of somebody has to own that process. Somebody has to try to keep a list updated, and somebody has to really sit down and decide when's the best time to send out a message like that. And what are the 5 or 6 pieces of information we're going to pull together and put in a message like that. But how do we help our youth who leave be aware of how our community is changing, so that as their own life is evolving, they can remember home? They may or may not have family that still live in the region, but how do we help them feel connected if they're not already coming back? So this is my challenge to you. What's one thing you can do in the next 60 days to start making your region more welcoming to newcomers? Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry I talked for so long, but there's 5 more minutes. I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Thank you, Mallory. And again, post some questions. We have a few minutes, and throw in the chat some of what you're going to do in the next 60 days. That's a great take action step. We have some really great practical ideas from Mallory, and what a helpful way to think about really strengthening our communities.
I have a couple more slides, Patty.
Okay.
Here's the team at Mizzou that can help you in this space. And here are some of the things we do. It ranges from a newsletter to applied analysis projects like the Northwest Missouri Project to strategic doing. You can find more information online at our website, which I'll drop in the chat. And I do encourage you to subscribe to the Missouri Economy Indicators newsletter. It comes out once a month, and it always has data relevant to Missouri. So it's a great resource within the state.
We have some kudos from Steve Hennis coming through the chat. Thank you, Steve. Good to see you. And while we're wrapping up, I would like to share just a couple more reminders of who Start Here is, what we do, and our upcoming webinar. So I will share my screen, and here we go. Again, Start Here is a group of resource partners in West Central Missouri. We're working really hard to leave no entrepreneur behind. And those are people on the ground in economic development, small business development, and we are really all about entrepreneurship. And this webinar that Mallory just described hits one of the biggest things needed, and that is social connection. In our rural communities especially, that's one of the biggest assets we have to help entrepreneurs get started, going and growing. And so very excited to have those tips from you about that. I am having trouble with my slides, but I want to let everyone know that our plan every other month with our Start Here series is to present helpful community and economic development resources focused on entrepreneurship. And we're going to focus in June. That is 1 p.m. June 5th, and I will send out the information when we have that together. The topic will be youth entrepreneurship. And we are going to be featuring some examples from Missouri, but also a very interesting grant opportunity for schools in your area to develop youth entrepreneurship career pathways programming. So those will be on the agenda June 5th at 1 p.m. And you can contact us, the Start Here Network, through New Growth. We're the convener of the network, and that's newgrowthmo.org and at newgrowthmo on social media. We'll be following up with you with an email, and I'm assuming I'll be sharing a PDF of the slides with everybody, and stay tuned for more. Okay, I think that's it for us today. I appreciate everybody coming. We're looking forward to seeing you again. And thank you so much, Mallory. What great research and really practical, helpful ideas that you brought with us to us.
Thanks so much for having me, Patty. You're a great partner and collaborator.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.